Welcome to Living Word Ministries with our director and Bible teacher, Debbie Blank. Debbie's passion is for you to understand and apply God's truths to your life. Now let's listen and enjoy teaching from the Word of God with Debbie Blank.
So, the Antichrist is going to come out of a Roman Empire. But wait a minute. There is no Roman Empire. So how is he going to come out of the Roman Empire? Okay, let me show you. Let me give you some information here. The first thing I want you to see is, there we go. I'm going to show you a few things here. This is the European Union office in Brussels. Do you see what that statue, this is the statue right outside. Do you see what that statue represents? A woman riding a beast. That's outside the European Union office in Brussels. Okay, the next one is the same statue, just a little different angle. Do you see? A carefree, voluptuous woman riding this, not just a horse or something, but a beast. Now, the next couple of ones are interesting because this is a €2 coin. Do you see on the left, if you look very closely, that's a description right there of a woman riding a beast. Then you have, on the next one, you have a stamp. And there you have a woman riding the beast. Europe isn't even coy about it. It's like they're saying, we are the revived Roman Empire of the Bible. It's like that they're trying to say that. Otherwise, why would you use these symbolisms? And these aren't the only symbolisms. There's other things that they've used too. And so let me show you a map of the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire technically divided in 476 AD. And what you see there is the dividing line of the Roman Empire, the east and the west. Now take a good look at that, because what you see on the western side is most of Europe, not all the way up to Germany, or at least not up into all of Germany, but certainly most of existing Europe today, plus you see northern Africa. On the east side you see Greece, Turkey, the Middle East, and northern Africa from the pretty much from the Egyptian side, the Libya side, that area right there. You see the division of east and west. Now, without explaining it to you, because we don't have time, but if you go read about the statue of Daniel in chapter 2 of Daniel, what you learn is that the statue that represents all the nations that are going to come into control Israel until the end, the legs in that statue represent Rome. And isn't it interesting? Of course, you have two legs. And here you have a divided kingdom, east and west. So if there's going to be a revived Roman Empire, and it has to happen based on Daniel 9:25, if there's going to be a revived Roman Empire, do you think it's going to look like this? It's going to look something like this. Now keep in mind, if you go back to that statue of Daniel chapter 2, it talks about the final it talks about the final world empire as having feet of iron and clay. And the feet of iron and clay, how many toes are on those feet? 10 toes, which gives you the idea of 10 kings or kingdoms in this one kingdom. But they're made of iron and clay. Now, I don't know if this is right or not, but my current philosophy, not biblical, but my current philosophy is, I wonder if the iron could be the western part of the Roman Empire, which is the solid legal structure and of government of Europe, and the eastern part could be the Islamic Empire, the feet of iron and clay being the feet of clay from the Islamic Empire, because that Roman Empire is currently Europe and the Islamic, major parts of the Islamic Empire. Could be. Now let's look at the next one, because this shows you now the current European Union as of 2013. There's 26 countries in this union. It started out with 6 countries in 1957. That's another thing that we've lived through in our generation, so to speak, and that is the establishment of a European Union which is very close to the Roman Empire. They are gaining enough power, even though they're having lots of problems, they're gaining enough power to become possibly the strongest force in the world. If the United States continues to go down financially and in world power and with our debt situation, they could become the strongest conglomerate in the world. Now you'll notice it goes up a little further north. It goes into Finland and Sweden and so forth, and it includes Poland and parts of Germany that weren't in the original one, and it also goes down to Greece, so it goes in a little bit into the Eastern Empire. But you can see now how you have here the formations in our lifetimes of what could be the beginnings of the revived Roman Empire. And that is what says it's going to happen in verse 10 when it says, 5 countries have fallen, one is the Roman Empire, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. So this is not going to be a long-term nation in charge of world government. It's going to be short-term, a little while. Now let's go to the next slide, because here we have in verses 11 and 12, it says, and the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Jiminy Christmas, I'm good at math, but I'm getting a little confused here. I mean, you got 5 that have fallen, one is yet to come. Okay, there's our 7. But wait a minute, now we got an 8th. Where'd he come from? That's always confused me until recently when I thought, aha. Let's think of it this way. We've already got the system set up where you've got the Antichrist running the one world government. And you've got the religious system on top of him, riding him. Now, think of it this way. When somebody rides an animal, who's in control? The rider. So the religious system has more power than the Antichrist at the beginning of all of this. We're going to find out that later on that the Antichrist gets rid of this religious system. And when he does, we've already read it from Revelation 13, he's going to make himself out to be God. He's going to set himself up on the temple of God and declare himself as being God. And when he does, is he going to need a religious system then to support him? No, he's not. Why does he? He's his own religious system. He's his own God. So he's the 7th. The revived Roman Empire with him in charge is the 7th. But then he becomes an 8th because he's different. Now he's going to be a sole ruler of the world. He's not going to be a world leader of all the countries, but he is going to become a world leader, a theophany. Is that right? Anyway, it's going to be he's going to be the only God, and he's going to be the only government. So he's an 8th because he comes out of the 7th. That's the only thing I've ever seen that makes sense to me. Is it right? I don't know. This is a mystery, remember? But it does make sense as we look at it because it says, he himself is also an 8th, but he's one of the 7. So he comes out of one of the 7, which would be likely the revived Roman Empire, and he goes to destruction, which we will see in chapter 19. Now verse 12 is going to explain the 10 horns. It says, and the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. All right, now, you got 10 kingdoms and they haven't yet received a kingdom. If Jesus Christ is coming soon, and I believe he is, that means that all the players are in place in this world to have these 10 kingdoms. And yet, there's no division yet. Or is there? Let's look at the next slide. This is a 2009 map from the United Nations. We had, somebody was talking about this the other day, Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development. That's what this report is all about. Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development so that we can maintain people on this earth and provide for them. The United Nations has mapped this out, and if you were to look at that map closely, which you cannot see, but you can count the colors on the left-hand side, how many colors are there? 10. The United Nations has divided the world into 10 territories or 10 systems. Nobody right now in any of those territories has complete control of those territories, of any one territory. I mean, the United States is the United States, Canada, and Europe, where we're all considered one. Well, you put us all together, we're all independent units. We do not yet have a kingdom like they're recognizing. But just 4 years ago, the United Nations is recommending this. And as Rob has said, Agenda 21 is moving forward. If you aren't familiar with it, go Google it and find out. It's moving forward, and the goal is to divide the world into 10 units. Could that be the 10 kingdoms that we're talking about here in verse 12? Well, if Jesus is coming soon, it's right there. And if this isn't it, there's going to be something down the road that looks like this, where the world is divided, but it's not divided yet into these kingdoms. So they don't have their kingdoms yet, but they are coming. And when they come, they receive authority as kings. So when you think about it, what does a king have authority over? Their whole territory. And they have authority with the beast for how long does it say? 1 hour. Do you think that 1 hour is literal or figurative? Okay, figurative, why? Very short, okay. It could very well mean that. It could very well mean a short duration. Being a figure of speech and saying that it will be short of duration. Chances are it won't be 1 hour literally, because too much has to happen that probably won't happen in an hour, with the whole world finding out these 10 kingdoms are in control, and then they give them their power to the beast, and then they destroy the city of Babylon. That's not going to happen in 1 hour. So this has to be a figure of speech. I believe in Daniel chapter 2 that these 10 kings that it's talking about here are the 10 toes of the kingdom of Daniel chapter 2. And Daniel never gives us any information except to say that they are 10 kingdoms and they're iron mixed with clay. And if you know, of course, iron and clay do not mix. So you're combined, but you are not in agreement. So I think that's what we're talking about here. Then it goes on in verse 13 to say the purpose of these 10 horns, these 10 kingdoms. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to whom? To the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb. So when you have these 10 kingdoms come together, and this is, by the way, when they give their power and authority to the beast, that's future tense, so they haven't done it yet. When they come together and give their power to the beast, their goal is to do what in verse 14? Wage war against the Lamb. And who's going to win? The Lamb. Yippee! God is going to reign. He is going to win. We've already seen through chapter 16, he's won. What we're seeing here right now is just kind of an overview of what that looks like. And it says, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and the chosen and the faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are many peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. We've already talked about that. Now verse 16 goes on to say, and the 10 horns which you saw, which we now know are 10 kingdoms who have given their authority to the beast, the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, the Antichrist, they will hate the harlot, future tense. They will hate her, and they will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. What does that tell you is going to happen? The political system is going to destroy the religious system, because he no longer needs the religious system. Now, let me give you an example. And truly, this is an example. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen because I don't know. But let's just say that Islam was the world religion. And again, I'm just using this as an example, please. But I'm trying to help you to understand. If Islam was the harlot, and the Antichrist was their 12th imam that they're waiting for, well, the Muslims cannot worship the 12th imam. They can only worship Allah. So the 12th imam will come in joint workings with Islam to build a world government. But when the 12th imam would call himself the Messiah on the throne in the temple in Jerusalem, Islam cannot go along with that because he's not Allah. So one of the entities is going to have to be done away with. And that's when the Antichrist would do away with the religious system. Now, again, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but something like that will happen because the religious system is not going to be able to tolerate the Antichrist saying that he is God. And so the Antichrist, according to verses 16 and 17, will come and destroy the religious system. So we're looking here at probably the middle of the tribulation when that happens. When he declares himself to be God and stands up on the Temple Mount, that's when he has to get rid of the religious system, because they will not go along with it, regardless of what religious system it is. So verse 17 it says, "For God has put in their hearts," and that's the 10 horns, the 10 kingdoms and the beast, "to execute" what? His purpose. Interesting, by having a common purpose. So they think it's their idea. But whose is it really? It's God. God is going to destroy once and for all the false religious system of just apostasy and idolatry that's been going on since sin came into the world. He's going to destroy it, and he's going to use these evil people to do it. Now, is it right? Does God ever use evil people to carry out his will? Oh, all the time. All the time in the Old Testament. He uses the king of Babylon, the king of Syria, the pharaohs of Egypt. All the time he uses evil people to carry out his will. And that's what he's going to do here. They're going to carry out a common purpose. And it says, "And by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled." This is an overview of what's going to happen to the religious system, the harlot. So understand in chapter 17, harlot, mystery Babylon, is a religious system. And she and the Antichrist, she's going to have control over the Antichrist, or at least it's going to appear that way. Because remember, what we talked about in Revelation 13 is that the Antichrist will probably not be indwelt by Satan until he was and is not and comes again. Until he is not. Until the middle of the tribulation, when he dies or has a fatal wound or something happens, that's when it looks like he becomes empowered by Satan. That's when Satan is thrown down to the earth, knowing he has a short time, according to Revelation 12. That's when all hell breaks loose. The last half of the tribulation starts. That's when he declares himself God. And when that happens, he will do away with the false religious system. So does that explain chapter 17 to you? Does it make sense? Now, the issue here is the text never tells us that she's a false religious system. It never tells us that. But we have to understand, and in the Bible, she generally can refer to religious systems. It does to Israel. It does to the bride of Christ. We also, and it certainly did to Asherah and some of the false gods. We also know from the descriptions we talked about early on that some of what she does doesn't simply just match up with the city. There's something else about her. And the fact that she has the kings and the people of the earth in the cup of her hand with the blood of the saints because of the idolatry tells us that there's idol worship. And that means a false religious system. So then it's time to move on to chapter 18. Now, before we move on, I did put a chart together about what we learned about the beast. And it helps me if I chart some of these things, because it's easier to see rather than, going in and out of the verses. But the beast, it tells us, the woman sits on this beast. The beast is full of blasphemous names, 7 heads and 10 horns, just like described in chapter 13. Was, is not, is about to come up out of the abyss again, just as described earlier. 7 heads, and by the way, he has 7 heads and 10 horns. We saw somebody else that looked the same way or similar. Who was that? In chapter 13, or actually in chapter 12. Satan. Satan was actually described as having 7 heads and 7 horns. 7 horns, but he described very much in a similar way. So then it describes the heads and the horns and what they mean, and then it tells us that he's an 8th, but he comes up out of the 7 kings, or the 7 kingdoms. So now, what I did here was I put a comparison chart about this apostate religion, or the harlot, versus the true church, because isn't it just like Satan? Satan is the counterfeit of the truth. The harlot, and whereas the true church is the bride. She was in the wilderness, and the true church is in heaven by the time we get to chapter 19. The harlot was adorned by Satan. We're adorned by Jesus Christ. And the apostate church, or the religion, is going to be judged forever, and we get to be with Christ and reign with him forever and ever. And when it comes to blood, they took advantage of the martyrs. And we, on the other hand, are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, by the blood of Jesus Christ. So it's interesting when you compare the two, you see complete opposites. And you can see the difference, which gives us more understanding how this harlot is an apostate religion. All right, our next slide then takes us actually to the last verse in chapter 17. Because really, I think, it's taken me 37 years of studying the book of Revelation to understand this, but I think the last verse in Revelation really should be the first of, the last verse in Revelation 17 really should be the first verse in chapter 18. Because this verse goes completely with chapter 18. It says, the woman who you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. And the whole discussion of chapter 18 is the commercial Babylon, the great city that we're going to talk about here. There you have an idea of how Babylon has fallen and the destruction that's going to take place that we're going to read about in chapter 18. We're now just getting a glimpse as we go into chapter 18 of what all of this destruction of Babylon is going to look like. So let's look at the first few verses. And it says, and I'm really going to go through this chapter very quickly because it's pretty repetitive. But the first 3 verses give an overview of what's going to happen. After these things, and that's the division of the Antichrist and the religious system. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and she has become a dwelling place. See, this is a city, it's a place. Now we're seeing a whole different description of this Babylon the Great. Here it's called a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Sounds a lot like demonic activities taking place in that city, doesn't it? So it says, verse 3, For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. So based on verse 3 here, what relationship who are the people that she has control over, according to verse 3? Okay, the first one are the nations, and then the second group is the kings, and then what group? The merchants of the earth. They've all become wealthy because of her sensuality, because of her idolatry. Now remember back to when we studied the very first church in Revelation 2:1, the church of Ephesus. And we talked then about how in the book of Acts, chapters 18 and 19, Demetrius, the silversmith, became very wealthy because he used to make shrines to Diana. And he didn't want Paul sharing the gospel because it would take away from his business. We see the same idea here, and that is that people are becoming wealthy by the idolatry that's taking place in this city by her idolatry, the harlot's idolatry. Now verses 4 through 6 read, And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive her plagues. For her sins have piled up in heaven, up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back, even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much for her. In other words, give her twice as much of the martyrdom, of the problems that she gave to the saints. But it's interesting in verse 4 because the angel said what? Who is he talking to in verse 4? Yeah, he says, my people. He says, come out of her, my people. Well, who are God's people? Believers. So there's still believers that are on the earth at this time. And he tells them to come out of this city. I think of the city of Sodom. When God was going to destroy that city, and he went in and he spoke to Lot. And he said, you and your family, come with me. And only a few of them did. He and his wife and his 2 daughters are the only ones that left. And the rest of the city was destroyed. And the wife was destroyed because her heart was still back in Sodom. So that's what I see happening here. God is saying, in effect, Get out. Get away from her. So you don't participate in her sins. Don't be defiled by what she's doing, and so that you don't receive her plagues, so that you won't go to destruction, so you won't die in what I'm going to do to judge this city. He said, he's just saying, warning them, get away. Isn't God great? He always gives us a way of escape. You know, he doesn't take problems out of our lives. He just walks us through them. He promises in Romans 8:28 that he will cause all things to work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. So God will work everything together for good. Doesn't mean he's going to take it away. Doesn't mean we're not going to have trials and tribulations. But he is going to walk us through it. He is going to make everything better in the long run. And here he's saying to the people, get out. Get out. Be prepared. I'm getting you ready. Get out of there. Now, verse 7. We have understanding of why she's destroyed, why this city is going to be destroyed. To the decree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she's going to be burned up with fire, for the Lord who judges her is strong. One day. Now, is this a figure of speech also? Or could all of this happen in one day? It could happen in one day. In Isaiah chapter 63, it says, can a nation be born in one day? And yet that's exactly what ended up happening. Let me read you the passage here. It says, it's Isaiah 66, verse 8. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Can a land be born in one day? Can a nation be brought forth all at once? And it happened. Just as God predicted, the nation of Israel came forth in one day on May 14th, 1948, just like God said it would.
Thank you for joining us today on Living Word Ministries with Debbie Blank. Living Word Ministries is a listener-supported program. To contact Debbie Blank, you may do so at livingwordministry.org. That's www.livingwordministry.org. Please tune in each week at the same time for Living Word Ministries with Debbie Blank.